Cuernavaca, Mexico, the 16th of December, 2009. An upscale apartment complex in a city known as a weekend escape for the wealthy of Mexico City. The building is surrounded. Elite troops of the Mexican Navy Marines, acting on intelligence shared by the United States, have sealed off every exit. Inside is one man and his bodyguards, and they have no intention of surrendering. What follows is not an arrest. It is a battle. For roughly 2 hours, the apartment complex erupts in sustained gunfire, the Marines fighting their way in against a heavily armed defense, grenades and automatic weapons turning a luxury address into a war zone. When the smoke finally clears, the man at the center of it is dead. His name was Arturo Beltrán Leyva, and not many years earlier, he had been one of the closest partners of the most famous drug lord in the world, a pillar of the Sinaloa Cartel, a man trusted at the very core of El Chapo's empire. This is the story of how that partnership shattered, of how two men who had built an empire together became enemies, and how the suspicion of a single betrayal plunged the Sinaloa world into a war that consumed thousands of lives. And it is, in a way, the first chapter of a story that is still being written today, because the betrayal that destroyed Arturo Beltrán Leyva was the first time the Sinaloa family turned its guns on itself. It would not be the last. To understand the fall, you have to understand how high the Beltrán Leyva brothers had risen. There were several of them, a family of brothers from the state of Sinaloa, the same rugged heartland that produced El Chapo himself. The most powerful was Arturo, known by the nicknames El Barbas, the Beard, and at the height of his power, the boss of bosses. Alongside him were his brothers, including Alfredo, known as El Mochomo, and Hector, known as LH. Together, they commanded one of the most formidable organizations within the broader Sinaloa world. Their story began, like so many in this trade, in the mountains and small towns of Sinaloa, where poverty and the drug economy had been intertwined for generations. The brothers came up through that world alongside El Chapo and the other future bosses of the cartel, bound together by geography, by blood ties and marriages, and by the shared, dangerous business of moving drugs north. As the Sinaloa Cartel grew into a dominant power through the 1990s and 2000s, the Beltrán Leyva brothers grew with it, each taking on a piece of the operation. Arturo was the leader, the strategist, and the face of the family's power. Alfredo ran key operations of his own. Hector managed yet another portion of the empire. Together, they functioned almost as a cartel within the cartel, a powerful, semi-autonomous bloc whose loyalty was part of the glue holding a crucial section of the Sinaloa world together. For years, that loyalty held. The brothers were not merely allies of El Chapo. In the language of that world, they were family, and they were not outsiders. The Beltrán Leyva brothers were among El Chapo's oldest and closest associates partners, who had grown up in the same world, fought the same early wars, and risen together. Within the Sinaloa Cartel, they were indispensable. They controlled key smuggling corridors. They ran the logistics that moved enormous quantities of cocaine. And above all, they were the masters of corruption the brothers built and managed the cartel's networks of bribery that reached deep into the Mexican state, penetrating the federal police, the security agencies, and according to later investigations, some of the highest law enforcement offices in the country. If the Sinaloa Cartel was an empire, the Beltrán Leyva brothers were among its most powerful princes. The scale of their corruption was almost difficult to believe. the Beltrán Leyva organization did not merely bribe local police. It reached into the highest levels of Mexican federal law enforcement. According to the investigations that followed, the brothers had informants and paid protectors inside the very agencies tasked with hunting the cartels, including, allegedly, within elite federal units in the specialized organized crime prosecutor's office itself. Information flowed to them before raids happened. Operations against them were compromised before they began. For a time, the brothers seemed to know everything the state intended to do because they had bought the people who were supposed to be doing it. It was this penetration of the state, more than firepower alone, that made them so formidable. And when it was finally exposed in a sweeping internal housecleaning, the revelations shook the Mexican government to its core and laid bare just how thoroughly organized crime had compromised the institutions meant to fight it. They also fielded some of the most fearsome enforcers in the trade. Among them was an American-born trafficker, a man from Texas who had risen improbably high in the Mexican underworld and become one of the brothers' top lieutenants, a figure the press would come to call La Barbie. La Barbie was a story unto himself. Born in Texas, a high school football player from a middle-class American family, he had crossed into the Mexican underworld and risen, astonishingly, to become one of the Beltrán Leyva organization's most trusted and feared enforcers. He commanded gunmen in the cartel's wars, and he became notorious for the brutal, video-recorded interrogations of rivals that surfaced during the conflict. An American running enforcement squads for a Mexican cartel, he was a living symbol of how completely the trade had blurred the line between the two countries. When he was captured in 2010, the year after Arturo's death, it was another blow to the shattering organization and another reminder that the Beltrán Leyva empire had reached not only into the Mexican state, but across the border into the United States itself. The Beltrán Leyva organization was wealthy, violent, deeply connected, and absolutely central to the Sinaloa Cartel's power. And then, in early 2008, it all came apart. In January of that year, Mexican authorities captured Arturo Beltrán Leyva El Mochomo. And almost immediately, his brothers came to a conclusion that would change everything. They became convinced that El Chapo himself had betrayed them, that he had handed El Mochomo to the government, given up his own partner's brother in order to remove a rival, or to buy favor with the authorities, or simply to weaken a family that had grown too powerful within the cartel. Whether or not it was true has never been definitively established. But in the world of the cartels, the belief was enough. The Beltrán Leyva brothers split from the Sinaloa Cartel and declared war on their former partners. In truth, the seeds of the rupture had been planted long before El Mochomo's arrest. As the Sinaloa Cartel grew, so did the tensions within it, rivalries over territory, over profits, over status, over who truly held power at the top. The Beltrán Leyva brothers had become enormously powerful in their own right. Powerful enough that some within the cartel may have come to see them as a threat rather than a pillar. So when Alfredo was captured in January of 2008, and the brothers concluded that El Chapo had been the one to give him up, the accusation landed on ground already prepared. It crystallized years of simmering resentment into a single, unforgivable grievance. The arrest may have been the spark, but the fuel had been accumulating for a long time. And once the brothers decided they had been betrayed, no amount of denial could undo it, because in the cartel world, the perception of betrayal is as deadly as the act itself. The war was savage, and it tore the Sinaloa world in two. The Beltrán Leyva organization aligned itself with Los Zetas, the militarized enemies of the Sinaloa Cartel, turning the conflict into a multi-front catastrophe. And in May of 2008, just months after the rupture, came the act that made the war personal beyond any hope of reconciliation. El Chapo's own son, Edgar Guzman, was killed in a hail of gunfire in a parking lot in Sinaloa, in an attack widely attributed to the Beltrán Leyva faction. The partner had become the killer of a partner's son. There was no going back. The war spread across the center and the Pacific coast of Mexico, and it was merciless. Resort cities that had drawn tourists for decades became battlegrounds. Bodies appeared in public places, often left with messages meant to terrify rivals and civilians alike. The conflict drew in the Zetas, the Sinaloa Cartel's own enforcers, the Mexican military, and a shifting cast of smaller groups until it became almost impossible to say who was fighting whom. What had begun as a dispute between former partners metastasized into one of the bloodiest fronts of Mexico's wider drug war, claiming lives far beyond the men who had started it. And through all of it, ran the original wound, the conviction, on the part of the Beltrán Leyva brothers, that they had been betrayed by the man they had trusted most. And it had become deeply personal. The killing of El Chapo's son had turned a business dispute into a blood feud. El Chapo had lost a child, and for a man in his position, the demand for vengeance was absolute. From that point on, the war was no longer only about territory or profit, or even the original suspected betrayal. It was about retribution, the most relentless and least negotiable motive in the entire trade. Two camps that had once shared an empire now shared only the determination to see the other destroyed. That is the kind of war that does not end in a truce. It ends only when one side is gone. For 2 years, the war raged across central and western Mexico, the body count climbing as two halves of what had once been a single organization tried to destroy each other. The Beltrán Leyva brothers, cornered by both their former allies and the Mexican state, grew more violent and more exposed. And the corruption networks they had spent years building began to be torn open. In a sweeping investigation, Mexican authorities arrested officials accused of working for the brothers, a stunning exposure of just how deeply the organization had penetrated the institutions of the state. The very networks that had made the Beltrán Leyva so powerful were now becoming a liability, a thread that investigators could pull. At the center of it all stood Arturo, El Barbas, the boss of bosses. He was, by every account, a man of enormous appetite and enormous brutality, a lover of lavish parties, of celebrity, of the trappings of power, and a ruthless commander who answered any threat with overwhelming violence. As the war turned against him, he moved between safe houses, surrounded by gunmen, a hunted man who had once been untouchable. The contrast was stark. Arturo had become a near mythic figure of excess, surrounding himself with luxury and celebrity, reportedly hiring famous musicians to play at his extravagant parties, moving through a world of wealth and women and seemingly limitless power. But beneath the glamour was a commander of terrifying ruthlessness, a man who had earned the title Boss of Bosses through a willingness to out-violence everyone around him. As the war turned against him through 2009, that world contracted, the parties stopped, the celebrity faded. He became what every hunted kingpin eventually becomes, a man moving from one safe house to the next, listening for the sound of soldiers, sleeping with his guards awake. And in December of 2009, the hunt caught up with him. Acting on intelligence, the Mexican Navy located Arturo at the apartment complex in Cuernavaca. The Marines moved in. What followed was the 2-hour battle that opened this story, a sustained firefight that ended with Arturo Beltrán Leyva dead. one of the most powerful drug lords in Mexico, killed by the elite forces of the state. The intelligence that finally located him reflected the deepening cooperation between Mexican and American forces in those years. When the Marines moved on the Cuernavaca complex, they came in overwhelming numbers, and Arturo's bodyguards chose to fight rather than surrender, turning the operation into the prolonged battle that ended his life. For the Mexican government, it was a major victory. The elite Navy had brought down one of the most powerful drug lords in the country, a demonstration that the state could still strike at the very top of the trade. But the bloody aftermath and the speed with which the organization sought revenge would be a grim preview of how little such victories ultimately changed. The operation also marked a turning point in how Mexico fought its drug war. The success of the Navy's Marines in bringing down a target as powerful as Arturo Beltrán Leyva established a template the state would lean on for years afterward, relying on its most elite, least corruptible units, often guided by American intelligence, to strike directly at the very top of the cartels. In the years to come, that same approach would be used against one kingpin after another. Arturo's death in Cuernavaca was, in that sense, not only an ending, but a beginning. The start of an era of high-profile takedowns that would reshape the leadership of the Mexican underworld again and again, even as they did little to slow the flow of drugs or stem the violence on the ground. But even his death became a source of controversy and further violence. In the aftermath, images of his body were circulated in a manner many saw as a deliberate display, a message about the cost of defying the state. And the organization answered with a horror of its own. In retaliation, gunmen targeted the family of one of the Marines who had died in the operation. The cycle of vengeance did not end with Arturo's death. It simply found new targets. The fall of El Barbas did not end the Beltrán Leyva organization, but it broke its back. His brother, Hector L.H., took over what remained and tried to hold the organization together. But without Arturo, the empire fragmented. Pieces of it broke away and became organizations of their own, smaller and more chaotic, fighting each other for the scraps of what the brothers had built. The American-born enforcer, La Barbie, was captured in 2010. Hector himself held on for years before he too was captured in 2014. Hector had inherited a losing position. The organization was already fragmenting, hunted from one side by the Mexican state and from the other by its former allies in Sinaloa, and there was little he could do to reverse it. His capture removed the last of the brothers who had once stood at the very summit of the trade, of the family that had risen alongside El Chapo, that had controlled the corruption of the Mexican state and commanded armies of enforcers. Nothing of real consequence now remained. In the space of a few years, the Beltrán Leyva had gone from princes of the most powerful cartel on earth to a cautionary tale. The first family the Sinaloa world devoured. And with that, the Beltrán Leyva organization, once one of the most powerful forces in the entire Mexican drug trade, effectively dissolved into the patchwork of warring fragments it had helped create. What replaced it was not order, but chaos. As the empire fragmented, its pieces became new organizations with new names, fighting one another across the territories the brothers had once controlled. The Pacific coast and the resort region around Acapulco in particular descended into a maze of warring splinter groups that would make it one of the most violent areas in the country for years to come. The fall of a single powerful organization, far from bringing peace, had simply shattered it into a dozen smaller wars. It was a lesson Mexico would be taught again and again in the years that followed. That decapitating a cartel does not end the violence. More often, it multiplies it. And so the brothers who had risen alongside El Chapo, who had been among the closest partners of his empire, were gone, killed, captured, scattered. The family that had helped build the Sinaloa Cartel had been destroyed by its war against it. But the deeper significance of the Beltrán Leyva story is not in how it ended. It is in what it began. Because the rupture between El Chapo and the Beltrán Leyva brothers was the first time the Sinaloa family turned on itself. For all its wars with outside rivals, Tijuana, Juarez, the Gulf, the Sinaloa Cartel had always held together at its core. The Beltrán Leyva split was the first crack in that core. The first time partners who had built the empire together turned their guns on one another over a suspected betrayal. And the pattern it established, trust broken, a partner suspected of selling out another. The family at war with itself would repeat years later on an even greater scale. In 2024, the Sinaloa Cartel would tear itself apart again when its co-founder El Mayo Zambada was lured to a meeting and handed to the United States by the son of his own partner, El Chapo. Once again, a suspected betrayal at the heart of the family ignited a civil war. Once again, partners became enemies overnight. The catastrophe consuming the Sinaloa Cartel today is, in a sense, the same story that destroyed the Beltrán Leyva brothers 15 years earlier, only larger and even more devastating. Seen across the decades, the Sinaloa Cartel's history begins to look less like the story of a unified empire and more like a long series of betrayals among partners who could never fully trust one another. The Beltrán Leyva split in 2008, the suspicion, the war, the killing of a son. Then, years later, the same dynamic on an even larger stage. The 2024 betrayal of El Mayo, the founder handed to the Americans by the son of his own partner, and the civil war that followed. In both cases, the cartel was not brought down by an outside enemy. It was torn apart from within by the breaking of a bond that everyone had assumed was unbreakable. The Beltrán Leyva were simply the first to prove what the entire Sinaloa world would eventually confirm: that no bond in that world, not partnership, not friendship, not even blood, was strong enough to survive the moment it became inconvenient. Arturo Beltrán Leyva was the first to learn the lesson that the entire Sinaloa world would eventually be taught. That in this business, the partner beside you is always the most dangerous person in the room. And so we are left, as we so often are with these stories, with a set of questions that may never have clean answers. Did El Chapo truly betray El Mochomo? Did he hand over his partner's brother to the government? Or did the Beltrán Leyva brothers go to war over a suspicion that was never true, destroying themselves over a betrayal that may never have happened? How deep did their corruption of the Mexican state actually run? Into which offices? To what heights? And how much of it was ever truly uncovered? And the question this whole history keeps asking: if the Sinaloa Cartel could turn on the Beltrán Leyva in 2008 and on El Mayo in 2024, was the empire ever really a family at all, or only a collection of rivals who happened, for a time, to find it more profitable not to kill each other? Some of those answers lie buried with the men who knew them. Others, as so often happens in the history of organized crime in Mexico, may never come at all. What is certain is this: Arturo Beltrán Leyva rose to the very top of the Mexican underworld as a partner of El Chapo, one of the princes of the most powerful cartel on earth. A master of corruption, a boss of bosses. He had everything the trade could offer, and he lost all of it and his life over a single broken trust, a suspicion that his partner had sold out his brother. He went to war against the men he had built an empire with. And in the end, that war left him dead on the floor of a luxury apartment, surrounded by the elite soldiers of the state, while the organization he had commanded shattered into pieces behind him. The Beltrán Leyva brothers were the first to discover what the Sinaloa Cartel would prove again and again in the years that followed: that the bonds at the heart of a criminal empire are only ever as strong as the moment they stop being profitable. In the Mexican drug trade, every partnership is also a loaded weapon. And sooner or later, someone always decides to use it. If this story showed you the hidden complexity behind the headlines, subscribe to Sleeping Crimes. Every week, we unravel the stories we need to understand, not to glorify crime, but to understand its real impact. Turn on notifications. We'll see you at the next crime.